Let's go. Here are threats in puzzle position. Rook takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Checks in puzzle position are. Rook to e8, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen to g7, check. Queen to h8, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. h4. Queen to d5. Rook to e5. Next, puzzle position vulnerabilities are. Bishop takes knight. Bishop takes pawn. Knight takes knight. Knight takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. Answer to this puzzle is. Bishop takes knight. Knight takes bishop. Knight takes knight. Rook takes queen. Knight takes queen, check. Let's continue. The threats are. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes bishop. Knight takes pawn. Checks in this position are. Queen to c8, check. Queen takes pawn, check. The puzzle is solved using. Knight to b3. Bishop takes knight. Knight takes queen. Let us go to the next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes knight. Queen takes rook. Queen takes knight. Pawn takes knight. Rook takes knight. Here are checks in puzzle position. Knight to e7, check. Knight to f6, check. Queen to e6, check. Queen to e8, check. The answer is. Knight to e7, check. King to h8. Knight takes rook. Pawn takes knight. Queen takes knight. Next puzzle position vulnerabilities are. Rook takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. The checks are. Queen to h2, check. Queen to h1, check. Queen to f2, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Queen to h2, check. King to f2. Bishop to h4, check. King to f3. Queen to g3, checkmate. Another one. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Bishop takes pawn. Queen takes queen. Pawn takes pawn. Checks in this position are. Knight to f3, check. Knight to e2, check. The best move in puzzle position is. Queen takes queen. Pawn takes queen. Knight to e2, check. Rook takes knight. Rook takes rook. Next puzzle. Here are the threats. Bishop takes pawn. Rook takes bishop. Queen takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. The checks are. Queen to g3, check. Answer to this puzzle is. Queen to g3, check. King to d1. Queen takes knight. Rook to c1. Queen takes pawn. Let's continue. Here are the threats. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Pawn takes knight. Rook takes knight. The checks are. Queen takes pawn, check. The answer is. Rook takes knight. Knight to f5. g4. Another one. The threats are. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes rook. The checks are. Knight to d3, check. The best move in puzzle position is. Knight takes rook. Bishop takes pawn, check. King to h8. Another one. Here are the threats. Queen takes knight. Queen takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Knight takes pawn, check. Knight takes pawn. Here are the checks. Queen to e7, check. Knight to d3, check. Knight takes pawn, check. The answer is. Knight takes pawn, check. King to d1. Knight takes bishop. Let's see the next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Rook takes rook, check. Queen takes rook, check. Queen takes pawn. Here are the checks. Rook takes rook, check. Queen takes rook, check. Knight to f2, check. Solution to the puzzle is. Queen takes rook, check. Rook takes queen. Knight to f2, checkmate. Another one. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Bishop takes knight. Bishop takes knight. Queen takes rook, check. Rook takes queen. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen takes rook, check. The answer is. Bishop takes knight. Rook takes queen. Rook takes queen, check. Rook takes rook. Bishop takes rook. Let's see the next puzzle. The threats are. Rook takes knight. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is. Queen to h5. Rook to e8. Queen takes knight check. Let's continue. Threats in puzzle position are: knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Queen takes pawn check. Rook takes pawn check. Checks in this position are: queen takes pawn check. Rook takes pawn check. The puzzle is solved using rook to g6. Queen takes rook. Rook takes queen. King takes rook. Knight to d6. Next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position: knight takes pawn check. Queen takes pawn. Rook takes bishop. The checks are: knight takes pawn check. Queen to g5 check. The answer is queen to h6. Rook to f7. Knight takes pawn check. Rook takes knight. Queen takes rook. Next, threats in this position are: bishop takes pawn check. Pawn takes pawn. The checks are: bishop takes pawn check. Queen to d7 check. Queen to d8 check. Here is the solution to the puzzle: queen to f3. Pawn takes pawn check. King takes pawn. Let's see the next puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position: knight takes bishop. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn check. Queen takes pawn check. Queen takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Bishop takes rook. Checks in this position are: knight to e7 check. Knight takes pawn check. Queen takes pawn check. The answer is queen to g4. Rook to g1 check. King to f3. Bishop to e5. Bishop takes bishop. Queen to c3 check. Bishop takes queen. One more. Here are the threats: pawn takes knight. Bishop takes pawn check. Pawn takes bishop. Rook takes bishop. Here are checks in puzzle position: bishop takes pawn check. The answer is pawn takes knight. Bishop to c5 check. King to h1. Another puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position: rook takes pawn check. Let us look at checks in puzzle position: rook takes pawn check. The answer is king to b3. Rook takes bishop check. Rook takes rook. Rook to c1. Rook to a6. Another puzzle. The threats are: knight takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. The best move in puzzle position is bishop takes pawn. Pawn takes bishop. Knight to e6. Knight to f6. Knight takes queen. Next, here are the threats: queen takes knight. There are no checks in this position. The best move in puzzle position is queen takes knight. Rook to d8. Bishop to e3. Rook takes queen. Bishop takes queen. Let us go to the next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position: pawn takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes rook. Queen takes pawn. Here are checks in puzzle position: queen to h6 check. Queen to h3 check. Queen to g1 check. Queen to e1 check. The best move in puzzle position is queen to e1 check. King to h2. Queen to h4 check. Queen to h3. Queen to f4 check. King to h1. Queen takes rook. One more. The threats are: rook takes bishop. Queen takes knight. There are no checks in this position. The answer is rook to d7. Rook to b7. Rook takes bishop. Rook takes rook. Rook takes rook. Let's see the next puzzle. Threats in puzzle position are: knight takes knight. There are no checks in this position. Answer to this puzzle is knight takes knight. Rook takes knight. Rook to e8. Knight takes pawn. Rook takes knight. Next puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. There are no threats in this position. Here are the checks: bishop to d6 check. Answer to this puzzle is king to a2. Bishop takes pawn. Bishop takes bishop. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.